Now, where did I put it? Here it is. Welcome to the Toolbox, where we discuss the tools we utilize every day. Yours to use or toss. It's up to you. But I hope you enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome back to Tools for the Toolbox. I am Chance Burles, as you know, and I have another outstanding guest for you here today. And I will get into it, as I always do, with who are you and what is your military background?
Yeah, I'm Alexis Travis. I'm currently serving in the United States Navy. My background is supply and logistics. And then inside of that, the communities that I've served with are the Seabees, so construction battalions, and submarines.
Sweet.
So that's kind of my basic background.
How were the submarines? Like in Canada, our submarines are, well, they don't work. So how, like, what is that like living in a submarine?
Honestly, I have very little to compare it to because I've never done the surface Navy. It's not as bad as most people think because you don't really think about the fact that you haven't seen the sun in a while because you're like, I don't know, you wake up, you do your job, you go back to bed. I feel like that's what everyone does on deployment. I really liked it though. It was challenging, but it's a really small ship with a really tight crew. And you know, the joke in the submarine force is submarines once, just because like once you've done it, you're part of it, and you can't ever not be part of it. So
yeah. I imagine it would be. It always feels claustrophobic. I mean, but that's from like movies and things. They try to depict it as being kind of that way.
It's not the roomiest place I've ever lived. But I was on one of our bigger boats. We have like a couple of different hull sizes, and I was on the biggest kind. So maybe I don't think it was that bad because I had plenty of room. But some of them I've walked on and I've been like, this doesn't seem. I'm glad I did not serve on this one. Like
I'm gonna see if I'm correct here. Was that the Los Angeles class for the biggest ones?
The Ohio class. I was on the Ohio class. That's like the big girls, like the Corvettes. Right on. They're old and they're busted, but they're big.
Well, you know what? At least they work. that's the important part.
Technically, yes, they still work.
Yeah, I think we bought ours. We bought 3. I think like 15 years ago, something like that. We bought 3 from the British. We had to sail them on the surface to get them back to Canada because they couldn't dive. We went on one test run and a fire broke out, so they immediately surfaced, and it was just bad. Bad. And now everyone's just like, we technically have submarines, but do we? Yeah, it was pretty bad. Right. So how
if the submarine can't also come back up, any boat can go down once. It's that ability to come back up that's really important.
Every ship can be a submarine once. Yes. One time. That's it. And it will stay as a submarine for many years after that. How long have you been in the Navy?
8 years. Just had my 8-year anniversary. So I'm almost, I don't know how it works in Canada, but for us it's like 20 years is considered a full career. Same thing. So I'm almost to the halfway mark.
Nice. They just recently changed it maybe about a decade or so ago where it's actually 25 now is our full careers. And yeah, I finished my 8 and I had about 2 months left in my contract, and I went out to my adjutant. I'm like, hey sir, so should I be doing anything? Like, my contract's up in like 2 months, so do I have meetings or, you know, medicals or anything that need to happen? And he was like, oh, yeah, come see me tomorrow. And handed me a 17-year contract for the next day. And I was like, no. No. Had he offered me like,
I see what you're doing there.
Right? Had he offered me like a 3 or a 5, I would have considered it. But 17 was just... No,
it's too much.
Can't do that. So why the Navy? Like, what was the choice?
Well, I originally wanted to be Marines. But at the time they had a really restrictive tattoo policy, and you can't tell because I'm in a hoodie, but, I got a lot of tattoos, and the Marine recruiter was like, we can't work with all that.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Right? And so the Navy recruiter was like next door, and the Navy recruiter was like, I don't care about the tattoos. I joined the military. So my brother's wife's brother which technically makes him my nothing, but we'll call him my brother-in-law, was in the Army in Afghanistan in 2006 to 2008, and also suffered PTSD, and his went undiagnosed. He had some very questionable leadership, at least from my perspective, that really ignored what I would consider some obvious red flags. And he ended up dying in a car accident.
That's too bad.
Because he was heavily self-medicating and making bad choices. Not uncommon, unfortunately, in that kind of generation of people coming through. And I pretty much dropped whatever was going on in my life at that point and was like, I'm going to commission and I'm going to be the officer that I wish he'd had. And it's like, I can't, it's kind of the starfish story, I guess, is like, I can't probably change everything for everyone, but maybe I can be the leader that, you know, I wish he'd seen so that he wouldn't have had to end up that way. And the Navy was like, sounds good, sign here. And here I am.
Did you go to the academy?
I did not. I went to public university, and then we call it a 90-day wonder. Nice. So I went to OCS, and it took me slightly longer than the prescribed 90 days to get out. But I made it. So.
So do you have any aspirations? Like, do you want to make admiral one day? Any ideas what you want to do with the Navy?
Yeah. So my typical answer to that is like, I'm going to keep staying in as long as the jobs are cool. As soon as they're like, hey, we need you to go on an unaccompanied tour to, you know, Kuwait for a year, I'm going to be like, maybe we skip that one. You know, I'd love to stay in and work in policy. The biggest impact obviously comes with the higher ranks. So my ability to make change that will last more than, you know, my small ripple effect is at the higher ranks. But I would happily sacrifice rank for the ability to make a difference. So if they were like, hey, you can do this thing, but your career's on the chopping block, I'd be like, run it. Let's
see what happens.
So no, I guess is the answer. I'm very non-aspirational.
No, that's good. You know, I think the best leaders are the ones that aren't looking to be in charge. Right? They're there to make change, or they're there to do the job or do something, but they don't really care what rank they're at. Right? It's not an issue.
Yeah.
And those.
I agree. The best leaders I've had, it was rankless. It was about their desire to do the job and be the leader. And sometimes that came with rank and billet, you know, but a lot of times not.
Yeah, I had a lot of, like, when I was when we went here up north, when we are privates in the engineer corps, we're called sappers. And I know in the U.S., sappers are only the people that have completed the sapper leaders course. And it made for very much confusion. We sent some dudes down, and we brought some Americans up, and everyone was calling, like, sapper this, blah, blah, blah. And everyone, like, the Americans were walking around the regiment going, like, wow, these guys are, like, fucking hardcore. Like, all right. But then until I realized that everyone gets called sapper, and they were like, oh.
Got it.
Right. But I was going to say, so when I was a sapper, some of the best leaders were corporals, right? Some of the sergeants were, they're sergeants, whatever, but the guys that were really looking out for each other and really trying to bond the units before we went overseas were all our corporals and all our good dudes. Most of them actually went quite a bit farther. Some special forces guys, some went into other trade and stuff like that. We have this new thing called CJIRU, which is the let's see if I can remember what it is. Canadian Joint I don't know. Anyway, it's basically it's the CBRN specific core. I don't know. But a lot of engineers go there because that's ordnance disposal and all these kinds of things is kind of plays into it. But
sure.
So I was looking at that initially when I wanted to get out, and then I was like, that seems like a lot of work. I'm just.
We hold off on a little bit of that.
I really, you know, as much fun as playing with sarin gas sounds like, I just don't really want to. Yeah. So what we want to talk about today in general was diversity. And it's a bit of a buzzword, right? Like there's people on kind of both sides of the fence that like diversity is strength, and then there's people that are like diversity is garbage. And then I think there's where most people are, where they're just like, just stop fucking talking about it. Like, let's just work forward. Like, we get it. Having people around is good. And I always likened it to the combined arms theory, right? That's the whole point. If everyone was infantry, nothing ever really gets done, right? And I was listening to a podcast a little while ago about the Boer War and the British. Canadians were involved in that, but to a lesser extent. And the infantry were so disciplined that they would not do anything without orders. Basically, like they wouldn't dig in. Yeah. And the other thing that they were saying was that the engineers at the time were the only ones that could dig trenches. So the infantry would like charge up a hill and they take it, and then they'd stop and they stack the rifles up and wait for the engineers to come to get them to dig them trenches. So then they could just. It was just. They took a lot of casualties. It was bad. But the concept being is that there's no integration, right? You don't have the infantry moving forward under artillery fire while you have tanks coming around the other side. That just seems to make sense. So what are some of the difficulties diversity-wise, or in integrating diversity in the Navy, the U.S. Navy?
Yeah, I think the biggest hurdle is kind of that second group you were talking about, of people who are like, diversity makes us weak and whatever. Because a lot of times when you're talking about bringing in diversity, one, people immediately go to like women and people of color, and they think that's the only kind of diversity that's out there, which it's not, right? Most of what we're talking about when we talk about diversity, at least from my perspective, is diversity of experience, because that gives you diversity of thought. And what I mean by that is like people who grew up really poor are going to have just a whole different relationship with the world than people who grew up middle class, and they're going to have a different relationship than people who grew up rich. And their ability to think about resources in that circumstance is going to be different, because people who, to draw on that example, people who grew up poor tend to be more risk averse with like the idea of losing resources, because they're like, no, now that I've got this, you can't take it away from me. Versus people who grew up, with a lot of extra money are maybe not as risk averse, which in some circumstances is good, but they may also not fully calculate like the value of things the same way. So when you combine those different experiences, you get a more complete planning cell, a more complete tactical picture. And nowhere in there did I say anything about, oh, well, this is a girl and this is a boy, or this is, a person of this descent. There's lots of different kinds of diversity. And I think helping people think about that more completely is one of the biggest hurdles we have, especially in our Navy, because people get really stuck on the buzzword version of it, where they're like, oh, you just like diversity because it's, it's good on your evals, or, it makes your commander look good, or, they really want you to just, bring in more people of this descent or that descent. And it's like, it's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think I can understand the adversity in so far into the extent of being told specifically, like, here are your quotas. We need this many people of this color. We need this many people of this gender. We need blah, 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 which never really makes any sense. And I mean, the concept of having a military that is completely volunteer is that you're going to have people volunteer. So it's going to be up in the air as to who comes in the door at the time versus anything. And then also, depending on your trade, you're going to have people will have proclivity towards something, right? Like up here, the combat arms are completely integrated in terms of male female, but it is still a male dominated world. That's not to say that there aren't women there, and there are. One of the issues I saw when I was coming through all of my training was a lot of the instructors were scared to discipline the females for fear of repercussions.
Interesting.
And even when I was an instructor, there were still instructors that were like, there was hesitancy to it. And I think what it came down to was the fact that there was still no real understanding that a troop is a troop. If this person's a bag of shit, they're a bag of shit. If this person's a good soldier, they're a good soldier. It just doesn't matter. Bags
of shit come in all sizes and shapes, particularly in the military, I've found.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember when I first started training, and I first noticed this when in basic here in Canada, we have one big building. It's called the Mega. It's 11 floors tall, and it's just like this giant concrete friggin' rectangle that sticks out of the ground in a place that is very flat. There's not a lot of other buildings that are anywhere close to it. You can see it for miles, right? And they immediately segregate the men and the women. So you have women on the 11th floor, and then male floors are like 9 down. And it always seemed like a bad idea, because when we go to the field, we're integrated. They don't have separate tents. If they're in a section, they live with whoever's in the tent, like everyone else does. Does that happen in down the States, or is that more? Is that do you see that as an issue?
Yeah, absolutely. So we just integrated Marine training maybe a year ago. I think so we've traditionally only trained Marines on the East Coast, and they just started putting female Marines through on the West Coast. And there's been a lot of pushback, but their argument is the same as yours, which is like, they're going to the same units and they're going to be sleeping in the same tents on deployment, and doing the same, riding in the same Humvees. Like, surely we can train them together. And, and we're segregated in some ways kind of more in the Navy, because we do have male and female berthing. So it's like, you are kept separated. But when I went through training, we had the hatch. So you had a hatchmate, you had one other person in your room with you, but the hall was just your class. And you went through with however many guys and girls were in your class, and your hatch could only be one gender or the other. But, that for me, that made it much better, because it didn't drive this weird wedge in between the boys and the girls. It was like, I know who the shitbags are, because some of them are guys and some of them are girls, but we all live on the same floor, so there's no hiding. And you know who the leaders are, and that's how it is out in the fleet. Is like, sometimes, regardless of whatever, you're all living together on the same P-way on the ship, and y'all have to stand watch together, and y'all have to, if the ship is sinking, everybody either sinks or floats. Like,
it reminds me of the old adage, there's two things that a soldier hates: change and the way things are. And that's just, it's one of those things that I think people are always going to complain about it. But do you ever see the movie Starship Troopers from back in late 90s?
Okay, so I haven't, but only because I love the book, and I hear that the movie is like,
it's out there. It's one of the things that I loved about the book was that it promotes complete inclusivity, right? You are either, except for the 2-tier system, obviously, but if you're a citizen, you're a citizen. Period. You're a citizen first, right? It doesn't matter that you're male, female, black, white, purple, green, whatever, right? It didn't matter. You're a citizen. If you're not, you're not. No big deal. In the movie, there's this big friggin' it turned into a bit of a political mess, because it shows co-ed showers. And which, to me, at the time, I was like a 17-year-old kid, and I was like, woohoo, co-ed showers, awesome, right? And I realize now as an adult, though, that it actually kind of makes sense. Because if you get to a point where it becomes a non-issue, that's integration, right? Like, and I think back to the civil rights movement in the 60s, and like, there's going to be pushback when you decide to change something, right? Until it gets to a point where that's just the way things are. And then if you want to change it again, then there's going to be more pushback.
More friction.
So
Well, and you bring up a really interesting point with, and this is going to sound really strange, but the co-ed showers. And I wish off the top of my head I could tell you which military it is. And I would try and name it, but then you would find out how bad American public schools are at teaching European geography.
Okay.
But there's, I'm pretty sure it's a Navy. It might be their whole military somewhere in Europe. And they are fully integrated. And part of their thing is they don't separate tents by gender. They don't separate showers by gender. And that's their whole point, is like, you have to get to a point where the person next to you, you know, the person driving your caravan, the person, it's a person. Yeah. And we're going to do that by treating everybody blindly as equals. And I'm sure there's drawbacks to it too, but it's a really interesting, and their culture around it has really built up. I don't think you can just
all of a sudden, tomorrow.
And now we all shower together. I feel like that would go really badly. But it's interesting to see, and it's definitely something to keep an eye on when you think about diversity and inclusion. It's like, it's not impossible for a dude and a girl to completely coexist, and surprise, no one assaults anybody. And they're actually just better at their job.
I think that's part of what creates that drive, because what made me actually really think about that scene in the movie was the fact that I remember there, again, here in Canada, we get a lot of British influence, and there was a newspaper article about how we have a thing called the Sunshine Girl in Calgary, and it was just a local model that would there'd be a little write up on her, and she would be in one of the pages in the local newspaper, right?
Yeah.
Whatever. And then they were comparing that to the UK, where they have something similar, but the women are topless. And over there, it's not an issue. Like, it's just as in Europe, it seems to be not an issue.
Fair.
I don't know. But the thing that really struck me was the fact that it became a cultural thing, right? And here in North America, we're a bit more, I don't know, what is the term I'm looking for?
Puritanical,
prudish. I don't know what the actual word is, but our standards are different. And I wonder if that's something that we could change. If we could culturally assist. I don't mean that we should have topless girls in the newspaper. What I mean is that, like, how do you think we push that envelope a little bit? Because it's got to be, as you said, incremental. It can't just be all of a sudden we're showering together, because people would lose their shit.
Right. I think the first thing is representation. I think you have to have people that other people are looking at, because if that are doing the thing, right? So when you have, like, for me, we had our first ever 3-star admiral in my community who was a female just a couple of years ago. And for me, that was huge. And every girl I know in my community, like, remembers where she was when she found out that a girl had finally made 3 stars. So a single person in a representative role can have a huge impact. And so, kind of the way to do that is put the people that you want to see integrated into public places integrated, so that other people can be like, oh, this is just the thing. And then we see it more. And, you can normalize all sorts of stuff like that. It would be wild to see a television show now that was segregated, right? Yeah. But that's like the way it used to be. It was like a big deal when Mr. Rogers had he had a black man on his show, and they like
wash their feet together.
Yeah, and it was a big deal. And, like, it's almost hard to explain to people why that was a big deal now, because you're like, their feet were in a kiddie pool. And that, and, like, so by changing kind of and putting it in the public eye like that, you can really have a big effect, not in a very small time. That was still, how long ago was Mr. Rogers? 40 years?
I don't like to think about it because it makes me feel old.
That's fair. I also still think it's the year 2000.
Yeah, exactly. I'm the same way.
Yeah, 1980 was 20 years ago.
Totally.
It's immaterial.
100%. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, inside of a generation, it's now unimaginable to go back to that. And so that means that, change in this way is also possible. You just need representation, and you need people who are willing, to be that representation and sort of make that, not make the stink, but stand their ground on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like we were saying earlier, like if that's the hill you're going to die on that hill, right? Rather than
tell the combat engineers to come dig this trench, because this is the hill
exactly.
I'm dying
on. We'll get up there after you're all done up there. Fair. That's a great point, having representation. It's difficult sometimes also as a man looking at the Army that has been, male led for basically ever, depending on which culture you want to look at. But it's difficult to come to grips with the fact that there is no representation, or there is very little representation for 50% of the fucking population. Right?
Yeah.
That's what blows me away.
And I think it's, I don't put the blame on any one person, because I've had these conversations with my husband, who is also a white man. He's blonde hair, blue eyes. He's the opposite of diversity in most people's heads. And the problem becomes that because that's all people see, in their head it becomes equivalent to a default.
Right.
And it's leaders look like this, and anyone who doesn't look like that is ooh, the exception. Mm-hmm. And the goal, if you want the kind of representation that changes that narrative, is to change the default to neither a man nor a woman, neither, not a specific ethnicity. The default is a person who can lead. Yep. That's the person who leads. Yep. Which is obviously much easier said than done. But yeah, and I think a lot of people who do see themselves represented don't necessarily understand how hard it is to try and put yourself into a role that you've never seen someone who looks like you in. Because you don't see it's like walking through a forest with a lot of underbrush. You don't see the way forward, versus if someone has come through, even if it's not the path you want to take, if you can see the path and you can see the light on the other side of the forest, okay, there is a way to do this without dying, and things seem much more manageable then. Yeah,
absolutely.
I was really bad at land nav, in case you can't tell. I had to bushwhack through a lot of stuff. It was not my thing.
I got lost on one of my. I can't say I got lost. I knew exactly where I was, but it was not where I was supposed to be. So that was a bit of a challenge. Yeah, it was. What I was going to say to that was, I think what it comes down to is standards, right? If you have, this is one of the difficulties here in Canada that I struggled with, and I know a lot of the guys I know struggled with, was that there's two standards. So you have a male standard, you have a female standard, and then there's and then there was another standard actually for it makes my Army sound.
This is a Canadian thing.
It makes my Army sound bad, but there was another one for people that couldn't meet the fitness standard that needed to get up to the fitness standard. So they would have an entirely different set of, they'd have to basically go to fat camp. And then
oh, that's called FEP.
Oh, okay, and then that would be a different standard altogether. So it's very difficult. When I was a sapper and I was wandering around the regiment, and I see people that guy went through the same course as I did. It was just as hard as the one I did. Cool. That person went through the same course, but it was not as hard as what I did. So, and then you start to compare yourself, which is silly to begin with. But because we all do it. But it comes down to is your personal pride, right? How hard am I going to push myself to get through this course? But I think having one standard minimizes a lot of that fragility to our ego. You know what I mean?
Fair. And some of what you have to think about when you look at that, because I get this a lot when I talk with people and they're like, well, then everyone should meet. In their mind, again, they think the male standard is therefore the default. So they're like, well, then everyone should meet the male standard. For us, our fitness test, we take it twice a year. If you fail it, the rules are always changing, but it's like if you fail it twice within 3 years, you get kicked out. It's something along those lines. And part of what you have to look at when you're thinking about a standard is, what is the standard for? So our fitness test is basically to make sure that you're like just not going to straight up die in the middle of your duty day. Like, and it's a little bit to make sure that when you retire, the VA isn't dealing with a whole lot of like, I don't know.
Yeah, they give you a benchmark, right?
It's a benchmark for that. It really doesn't have anything to do with our ability to do our jobs. Because if it had anything to do with my ability to do my job, my fitness test would test how many words I can type a minute, because I'm a desk warrior. Only half joking. But on a ship, like your ability to don firefighting gear and run up and down ladder wells has a lot more to do with whether you're safe to fight the ship in a casualty situation, in an emergency, than my ability to run 1.5 miles. You cannot physically run 1.5 miles on a submarine. I've tried.
Can't you run back and forth a whole bunch of times?
That would be a lot of times. And you'd have to go up and you can't go from like end to end.
There's those straight lines, right?
Once. It'd be a whole thing. You hit your head on the doors. So people get this idea in their head that the fitness test has something to do with our job ability. And at least for us, for our basic fitness test, it really doesn't. What they're looking for is to minimize risk. So to minimize risk for you and me, if you only have to meet my standard, then, and I'm not calling you out specifically, but only because you're a man, you could be a lot more of a fat body and meet my current standard than I could be. I'd have to work a lot harder. In the flip, and so that would open you up to risk, right? Because not you specifically, but people meeting that standard would, they might weigh more. That's risk for diabetes. It's risk for heart disease. It's risk for bad knees, which we all have in the military, but neither here nor there. And then in the reverse, if I tried to meet your standard all the time, I would have to work out a lot. And my risk of overtraining, of training injuries, things like that would go way up. So the military made, in this instance, 2 standards where we both assume roughly the same amount of risk. We both have to train a little. We don't have to train a lot. And because that particular standard is only there to make sure that we don't die in the middle of watch or accumulate a lot of medical bills, that makes sense. Because either way, if you change the standard to make it a single one, somebody is assuming a lot of risk there, either in the immediate or in the future. For job performance, a totally different thing, right? When you talk about like special forces and they're talking about like, but really to do your job, you have to be able to do X, Y, and Z. That's a totally different argument. And you should have set standards, because then you're talking about safety. You're talking about mission accomplishment. My ability to run 1.5 miles in under 15 minutes is not going to make the difference in World War III. Right? It just isn't. I hope.
Yeah.
God, that would be embarrassing.
The sad part is that I think we've gotten, militaries around the world have this same issues. It's confirmation bias, right? You have a bunch of dudes that can complete X, and you have a bunch of girls that can't. So they look at it and say, well, or they could, but like the average says that it's not going to equal out. And so you go, oh, well, I can get more men to do the job than women. But the sad part is that, again, being able to run, 2.4K here in under 12 minutes, it means nothing to me, especially as a combat engineer. We rarely ran. We would drive somewhere, we would get out, we would work, and a lot of it was upper body stuff. So we, putting bridge panels up, doing demolitions, moving ordnance, things like that. It's a lot of upper body stuff. And really, I don't give a shit if you can do the job. I'm like, I don't care. And one of the tests that we have to do in our engineer training is it's a bridge panel lift. It's a 400-pound bridge panel with 4 people, and you have to lift it from the ground in like a deadlift, and then you have to
Sure.
bring it up to your chest, wrap it up, and then press it. And then hold it there, and then bring it down, and then down. And like, so it's a staged lift.
I was on board until
the press, yeah. Okay. And the problem is, like, when it comes to bridging and using the MGB system and stuff, is that those bridge panels are always really high. So the tall guys are usually the top panel dudes that have to lift these things all day long. So yeah, I think we did a 27 bay bridge or something like that. It was ridiculous. And it was at an angle. We were going downhill. Wow. It was a crazy build.
The whole thing.
It was, and by the end of it, like I remember I had to have I was full pressed. I was up on my tippy toes and trying to get it like locked in so that the pin guy who was being held up by another person just to lock it in could get it in.
This is why we have safety.
Oh, there was a big one afterwards. But it was, I was capable of doing that job, but you had to be me to be able to do that with me. Because if I had someone that was 5'2" trying to lift a bridge panel next to a guy that's 6'6", that's silly, right? And there's that old adage, like, where if you ask an elephant, a goldfish, and a monkey to climb a tree, who's going to win? Right? Like, the capabilities are different.
Right.
And I think,
whereas if you ask an elephant, a goldfish, and a fish to, go pick up a gold coin off the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah, exactly. Like, fish is down. He'll figure it out, right? Yeah. Or you tell the elephant to remember something and everyone else will forget. But it's the concept, I think, that really, when it comes to diversity, is competence, right? It's just who can do the job. And
yeah. And I think people get very hung up on that, because when you say, like, oh, a person who's 5'2", a lot of people want to be like, see, way more women are 5'2". And it's like, okay, but like, I've worked with dudes who were 5'2", like, and they also could not work with you because they also had short, stubby little arms. Like, I'm 5'9". Yeah. I could like, choke slam that guy.
Which I'd love to see one day. Just maybe on one of your reel videos or something, just randomly, just boom.
I'll work on it. And no one is saying like, oh, let's lower the job standard, because then if we can't do the job, we're useless. Yeah. It's just about paying attention to, like, why does this standard exist? Does it make sense? And does it make sense to make it different for different populations? And like, because I'm on the officer side of things, and just so little of what officers do in most of our communities is physical, like, a lot of times when people are like, wow, women in this, and it's like, bro, like, again, my typing skills are much more important than my push-up skills. Like, if you're talking about my ability to order parts for a ship, which is what I do. And then on the other side of that, you say, but when I'm in a room and we are talking about logistics planning, or we're talking about, a ship movement, or we're talking about a port call, my different experiences, even as a woman, to bring that in, does actually impact things, because I'm trying to think of like I can't think of a good example off the top of my head, but, you're thinking about like, hey, maybe this is safer, or maybe we shouldn't put the Liberty bus stop in the dark corner of the parking lot because women might feel uncomfortable. And the guys are like, why would that make them uncomfortable? And we're like, that is why you've never been a woman in a dark parking lot. Like, and so if the job doesn't require whatever, then bringing in as many diverse points of view as you can does produce, we know, like, from 30 years of research, that it produces better results. You'll think about different sides of the tactical situation. You'll be more creative with how you address problems. And it comes with drawbacks. We were talking about the sapper thing. Anytime you have diversity, the likelihood of miscommunication goes up. I don't know how far you are from, the American border, but I'm an easy 6-hour drive to Canada from here. And we all speak English, mostly. Some of y'all speak French, right? Yeah,
unfortunately. No, it's good. No, technically speaking, Canada has English and French as actual languages. So yes, there are people that speak French.
But yeah. my likelihood to find someone who could speak English would be very high.
Yeah.
And, but if I came in and said something about Sapper, there you go. There's a moment where we might miscommunicate. So there are drawbacks to diversity, but usually when you compare them to the advantages that they bring, when we're talking about, planning, they're small. And when you look at the kinds of wars we're likely to fight if we ever go back to full-scale war, most of our near-peer competitors were looking at, cyber warfare. We're looking at a much more tactical picture than when we think about like World War II.
Which is all
we're not talking
strategic and arrows and divisions and blah blah blah.
Yeah. And so that's where diversity, the value of diversity over where it might have been in World War II, because you just need people to execute stuff. When you look back at World War II, especially if you look at like the Pacific, that was a war of attrition. Yep. We were just trying to like beat people into submission. That's very unlikely to be how the next war goes because technology has changed the battle space. And the only way we stay relevant with that is if we recognize that, okay, maybe people who would not have been great in World War II have something to offer now. We got to bring, what was your masters of mathematics, right? We got to bring nerds into the picture now.
Yeah.
Not a likely candidate to sign up for, infantry in World War II, but someone we might want to have on our team now.
Yeah, I have this great example of basically I got invited to do a toot, which tactical exercises without troops, right? And at least for us, you have to be a sergeant or above to really be involved. And I had a CO who was just really great, and he's like, well, master corporals are going to be the next rank. So just so you know, in Canada it goes private, corporal, master corporal, sergeant. And the sergeant's in charge. Basically, he's a squad commander at that point. Section commander, whatever. Anyways. So we're second in command of the section. And this CO was like, no, master corporals are going to be sergeants, and they're going to be in charge of troops anyway. They should be involved in the toot. And I was the only engineer there, and I was surrounded by infantry guys. And they were like, okay, so this is the plan. The Russians are coming down the hill. Tanks are rolling up here. They're going to come from this general direction. What do you want to do? And, the infantry guys came up with a pretty standard infantry way of doing things, right? We're going to set up trench lines here. We're going to set up the tank lines here. We're going to have these dugouts. We're going to blah, 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 make it like a line. Fuck these guys up when they hit us. Right? And then I walked in there and I was like, oh, this is like looking at the terrain, and it's got lots of really good undulating hills, and it's wooded, but not like thickly, so you could move troops around there pretty sneakily without being seen, but tanks would still plow through it. And so I came up with this whole plan where you could like reverse dig the backside of hills and basically create tank traps so that they go over the hill and go boom, right? And then have a bunch of smaller trenches with hunter-killer groups of infantry guys with Carl G's and like hit people from close range and blah, blah, blah. The whole totally separate, completely different way of looking at something. And I brought that to the CO, and he was just like, wow, this is pretty cool. And then one of the infantryers popped up, and he was just like, well, the infantry have no support. And I'm like, dude, this is like the Russians are coming. Support in Canada, we don't have enough troops to support everyone. So really, he was just like, well, if you have so many engineers, where are all your infanteers? I'm like, trust me, man, if you have enough engineers, you don't need infanteers. And he was just like, oh, got all like uppity about it. But the point is that, being able to look at something from a completely different point of view, from a completely different set of training, from a different set of experiences, from, as you said earlier, versus poor middle class versus affluent, will give you different environments. The way in which you were raised in each of those will still give you different ways of thinking, right? If you're completely entitled, that's one way of thinking. If you're but I mean, if you're taught financial literacy at a young age, you'll be able to figure, cost and balance and the balance sheet stuff.
Right.
I was not raised with financial literacy, whatever. But the point I was trying to get at is like, the language in which you use matters, right? And as
Absolutely.
you said, we all speak English, so it really shouldn't be that hard. Just here's the language. This is what we need to use. But I've seen this in advocacy work and dealing with veterans, and I corrected you earlier, which I was a little presumptive of correcting you like that. But
no, you're absolutely right too. You're absolutely right.
The language in which we use is really key, I think, and
it is.
As we said, diversity is a bit of a buzzword, right? What do you think needs to change in the language that we could at least head down that path, right? Like, what do you think? I'm putting you on the spot.
So there's,
fix the world for me.
A lot of changes, some of which are easier than others. One big thing, I made a joke about it on my Instagram a few days ago, and I definitely struck a nerve with some people, but and I do it as well. When you're referring to troops, to sailors, to whatever, man, people definitely default to male. They default to he, right? You know, this fictional sailor in this example is always a he, and they especially do it with leaders. And again, when we talk about that default, if I default to thinking that leaders are male, my actual ability to view myself in those positions changes, right? And when we see it in instructions, every at least for us, every Navy instruction has a disclaimer page at the beginning that's for the sake of brevity, we're only going to refer to sailors as male throughout this entire instruction. It's we don't mean to offend you. It's just what we're going to do. And it's I get it. But seriously, I read an entire instruction and I don't see myself anywhere in it. And so when we talk about language matters, it's the spoken language, right? It's not referring. I was trying to make a video earlier, and just to say my whole thing is basically diversity and inclusiveness. And I could not get through the story I was trying to tell without saying the phrase guys, even though I was referring to a group of boys and girls. And I was just it gets you. Change is hard, right? Nobody likes change. And so I think the little things like that are a lot more impactful than people think. And when leaders are talking, especially to big groups, being really mindful of that is, I think, the smallest but most impactful change most of us can make, because it usually doesn't matter. If I say men and women, if I say troops, if I say they, you probably won't even notice. But to a person who never hears themselves represented, it does make a difference. And it makes them feel represented. It makes them feel safe. It makes them feel included. And I think culturally, that's where you start to see the shift.
That makes a lot of sense. There were many times that I it's interesting because in Canada, when we use examples, we use rank, right? So Corporal Goggins will be going off to do that. Right. It's just in our written stuff, it's a lot of rank structure. But when it gets into specifically, or later on when it's and he did this, blah, 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 blah. The next example usually says, and she will do this, blah, blah, blah. So it becomes,
I love it.
They just add it in. And really, how is one fucking letter brevity? Really? Really? You're that's your issue? It's adding an S?
And I love that as an example, which is if you just make literally every other instance, boy and then girl, and then boy and then girl. It's if you're offending a guy because every other example is a girl, imagine how girls feel when there's no she's in there. And it's that's such an easy fix to make everybody feel. I'm actually reading a book that's doing that right now. It's a book called Nudge, and it's about choice architecture and leadership. And in it, I've noticed that every other example is boy and then girl and then boy and then girl, because it sticks out to me. It's oh, this is different, and I like it. I feel included.
It's nice. I think really, at the root of it all, it comes down to ego, right? I feel like I'm being attacked because I'm being forced to include somebody else, or whatever, however you want to play it. I look back at it now, and I think it's silly, right? Like, I saw it throughout the military. Just like it just doesn't make any sense. In the same way you brought up showing someone segregation. Now it would be like, why? Like, what does this even mean?
Right? This seems very
exactly. Yeah. It just needs, like we said, I mean, we've been saying this the whole time, it needs to become normalized that it's not an issue. But it's obviously an issue right now, but it just needs to get to a point that it's not an issue.
Yeah. And I think, the ego part you bring up, consciously or subconsciously, right? People think like, well, we earned our spot here. I earned my spot here, so I'm not the problem. Mm-hmm. And if you change things so that other people are earning spots here, somehow that threatens me. And a lot of the message that at least those of us who, are trying to change that narrative want to put out is like, nobody's trying to take anything from you unless you're the dirtbag that I'm better suited than. Like, if I'm going to beat you out for a job,
maybe you should try harder.
And it's because I'm better for it, then, like, technically, if you really cared about the team, you'd be okay with that because I'm better. And that's where, like, the frustration comes in is, like, if you were not worried that this was going to threaten you, then you wouldn't care. Because you'd want the best people on your team, which is why when we talk about like, in order to be inclusive, we need to lower standards. And it's like, or we build policies so that people don't get out of the military. A big thing in especially in the United States Navy, and I assume other portions of the military, is like when women want to have kids, the physical burden and the time it takes, a lot of people off ramp because it's not very compatible. Mm-hmm. And the problem is one, we're very expensive to train. We're just as expensive as men to train. And two, if everybody off ramps, we can't ever get them to those senior leadership positions, which means we're not getting that diversity. And it had nothing to do with whether she would be good at the job or not. It was like a 3-year period in her life where she like had some, physical limitations, where she had some other stuff going on. And so you want to build policies where, sure, we understand that in order to have families, the burden on men and women is different. But when you get a couple of ranks past that kind of portion of your life, we should be back to fighting based on merit, which might mean that a girl beats you out for the job, which is better for everybody because then better people are in the positions. Yeah,
I always wondered why it wasn't treated more like an injury. Like and I don't mean that it is an injury, but I mean if I was training, right, and I broke my femur, I would have, a few months of not going to work. I would be laid up on a cast. I'd have to do rehab. I'd be on light duties. I'd be blah, 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 blah for however long. I'd get it healed up. And I'd be back on the ground.
Yeah. And that's a question that I ask a lot of times when people take exception to the way pregnancy is handled. And the usual answer I get is like, well, I didn't decide to break my femur. And it's like, okay, but if you rode a motorcycle, knowing that motorcycles are more dangerous than cars, and you got in a motorcycle accident, like you kind of did choose it, right? Riding a motorcycle and breaking your leg is, I don't know the statistics, so don't quote me on this, but it's got to be at least as common as, having unprotected sex and a surprise pregnancy.
Yeah, and like a bunch of privates don't do stupid shit when they're not. Like,
you can't convince me of that. Look, I've had junior sailors. I've been a stupid junior sailor. Yes. And so you're right. Like we would never hold that against, a broken femur against somebody. And so why are the policies different? And people, and again, if you broke your femur and then 4 or 5 years later, you were up for sergeant or whatever's after sergeant because you were this great tactical thinker who thought about digging the back of hills out for tank traps. That would be significantly more important than ever breaking your femur. like such a small blip on the radar.
Yeah, it would actually, I think, give you points, right? Like, look at this dude. He broke his femur, worked his ass off, got back into the field. Now he's here and he's up for promotion. I would do the same, like, especially after watching my wife give birth to both my boys.
It's like a thing, man. I was not prepared. I would probably not have had kids if I'd known.
Yeah, my wife said the exact same thing, except we did it a second time, so I'm not 100% sure on that one. Yeah,
same. I did them really close together though, because it's like when you fall off a horse. Like if you don't get right back on, you're gonna start building it up in your head. I was like, we gotta go, or it's gonna be an only
let's get this thing going. That's awesome.
But yeah, no, and you're exactly right. And for me personally, I'm not only a better officer now that I'm a parent, so the Navy totally lucked out on that. But when I was, after my first child was born, I was diagnosed with postpartum anxiety and postpartum depression, and fighting through that and, being willing to ask help and all of those things totally changed me as a leader, for the better, right? Like I was a psychology major in college, so I had a very clinical understanding of those things. But when you've actually been through it, the whole thing is different. And so you're right. It's like you did this thing, you had to take all this time off, you came back, you fought through all these like physical changes, mental changes, roadblocks, whatever. And it's like, you're actually better now. And I'm not suggesting that anyone go out and break their femur.
No, that would be bad.
Yeah, please don't. It's like I get a message from the Canadian government. That's
what
like,
in the hell? But one other thing about being a parent is how much like a bunch of recruits is a 4-year-old. Like it literally teaches you how to train troops to manage children. Yeah. Like if you can manage toddlers, you're good to go.
Got it. Yeah.
No problem.
Like and it goes back to the instructor thing. Oh. It's like if you can explain it clearly enough for a toddler to actually do what you want them to do, you could probably
get a recruit to do
it. Or an officer. I'll say some of the people I've had the hardest time explaining stuff to is some of the officers, because they're very set in their ways, like a toddler. And I'm one of those officers, so I can vouch for that.
I had a lot of fun teaching officers because there was this. There here in Canada, it's a very distinct line between enlisted and officers, and we take a lot from the British, where it like there is a separation, and one of my favorite things to do was I called it I'll get into weapons appreciation in a minute, but so our rank system isn't that hard. It's actually quite simple. Our Air Force and Army is the exact same rank structure all the way up and down, officer, enlisted, no big deal. Navy is where, Navy guys they're over there.
Has to.
But what would happen is because we have master corporals and we have sergeants, so when you enter a room to deal with your section, they don't know who's coming. And, recruits get flustered and they're like, oh, God. And they would say, yes, master sergeant. And I'm like, did you just fucking call me a master sergeant? And he'd be like, no, Master Corporal. And I'm like, obviously, we need extra training on the rank system. And I would make them do extra stuff, right? And so I got called a Master Sergeant 4 times.
Yeah.
The first time everybody did push-ups, and we did, I call them chain push-ups. So I had everyone get into the position, and then one person said private and did a push-up. The next I said corporal and did a push-up. And the next I said sergeant. And it went all the way up the rank structure through everybody a couple times. Anyway, we did that once, and then we did the second time. I made them spell the acronym, so PTE, CPL, each person one letter all the way through, and then the third time I made them actually spell out the whole thing. And
oh my gosh,
you would not believe the amount of, you probably would, the amount of spelling mistakes somebody would make on lieutenant colonel when other people are spelling with you. Just trying to get well, it's
you call it
we're calling them
colonel?
Lieutenants. So again, British versus lieutenants.
Yep.
They're spelled the same.
Those crazy people down here.
They're spelled the same. I think lieutenant makes more sense. That's actually how it's spelled. There's no F in lieutenant.
Well, it's like, Yeah, it's like the French thing.
Yeah, anyway,
Yeah.
The fourth time it happened, it was one guy, and I made him write a 500-word essay on why we have structure difference, why they enlisted versus officers. And he came back, and in one of the lines, he was like, you know, officers are just are bred slightly different and have a higher level of education. And I was just like, did you just fucking call me stupid? I was being a jerk, but it was.
But yeah, but also
like again, words matter, man. Like you got to be 100% on this. I was big on it.
There you go. Words matter.
It was just.
Yeah, and I know plenty of enlisted who are as or more educated than officers. Yeah. It's a difference in role, not a difference in brains.
Yeah, I was bugging him. I was bored that day and wanted to make extra work, but whatever. So we've been rolling for a little bit over an hour here, and I just want to say thank you very much for being on here. It has been awesome chatting with you, and I just had a blast. Do you have any last words, anything we missed that you wanted to cover?
No, I guess, is it okay if I plug my Instagram?
I was actually going to ask you that next, but yeah.
Yeah. So I run an Instagram. It's milmama, MILMAMA _ on the run, ONTHERUN. So milmama on the run. And I just post funny videos about life in the military, trying to kind of make people laugh and build community and have honest conversations about diversity.
Yep.
So if that's interesting to y'all, I don't know if y'all.
It is in Alberta. We definitely use it. Absolutely.
Oh no, is Alberta like the weird?
Alberta's like the Texas of Canada. It's full of cowboys, and it's we're pretty Western over here.
Fair enough. I would love to have y'all come join the conversation. Okay. Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun. And it's always cool to get different perspectives. And obviously I haven't gotten to work a lot with the Canadian military, but it's high on my list. Yeah. So
well, the Navy guys know what they're doing. We don't know what they're doing, but they know what they're doing. So
that's how the submariners like it. We like when you don't know what we're doing.
Just don't go on our submarines. I mean,
deal.
Again, thank you very much for being on here. This is just, I actually found you on Instagram, and that was one of the videos you made me stop and laugh out loud, and I'm trying to remember which one it was. I can't remember.
That's what we aim for.
Yeah, it was something that you slapped the board. Anyway, I'll find it and share it on my stuff, but not someone.
Tag me when you share it, because I can't see
you were in a cubicle, and like you were saying something, and then you slapped the board, and it was like another 5-year contract.
Oh, it was talking about how we deal with burnout.
Right, yes.
And I was like, just throw an award at it. Like,
yes. I literally looked at it, I just stopped, and I was laughing, and I'm like, I gotta talk to this girl.
Those universal experiences, we've all been there.
Oh man, yes, have we ever? Okay. Again, this has just been awesome.
Much.
And I'll make sure everyone has your a link to the thing on the show notes and stuff like that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Have a good evening or afternoon, I guess, for you. Yeah.
That concludes this episode of The Toolbox. I really appreciate y'all listening. It has been my pleasure bringing you this awesome guest. If you like what you heard, please like, share, subscribe, and do all that awesome stuff. And I hope you can use some of the information that was offered. To all those putting on the line every day, first responders, military, veterans, civil servants, you guys are keeping us safe and keeping the country running. I really appreciate y'all. Hope to see you next time. Till then, stay open, stay humble, and stay focused. Shalom.